Welcome back to another episode of The Local Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Laurin, and today is part 2 of a 2-part series on tracking macros. So if you missed the last episode, I covered why you should start tracking macros. And today we are going to cover when you should stop tracking macros. And those are 2 very distinct things, but they of course go together, and they're both incredibly important. And I think that everybody can benefit from a time period of tracking. Do I think that every single person needs to track macros at some point in their life? No, I'm not going to say a statement like that. However, I do think that a lot of people can gain a lot of knowledge from it. However, it does not mean that you need to track macros forever. And that is what I wanted to cover on this podcast, because what I've found in my years of coaching is that one of the biggest things that we see is that people will start this, and then what should have become something that was teaching them about portions and calories and, their nutrient requirements and flexibility has now turned into a crutch, and it is very, very rigid. And I know we talk about this all the time in our content, but it really is the crux of almost every issue that we see. And tracking macros can become just as rigid as any other metric, and it can become just as black and white, off and on. So if you don't hit your macros perfectly, now all of a sudden you're completely off plan. And that is defeating the entire purpose of tracking macros. So in my opinion, when you should stop tracking is based off of 2 very important things. And the first thing would be when you're not able to stop tracking. And that goes into that black and white, off and on mindset as well. So if somebody were to say, hey, these are your targets, 200 grams of carbs, 150 grams of protein, 55 fat, you've been plugging along eating this. What you typically eat in a day. Okay, I have 4 meals. This is roughly the portion size. This is that. This is okay. Somebody takes away your food scale. Somebody takes away your tracking app. Somebody says, your coach says, hey, don't track for the day. And you're freaking out. That is indicative of a deeper issue, that you've become reliant on either the food scale and or the tracking app or any kind of tracking mechanism that you have. And you're now not able to self-regulate and moderate yourself around food. And that is what we don't want tracking macros to become. I want people to be able to use this to be precise and to work towards specific goals and to learn. But I don't want it to be a crutch that you can't let go of and has a grip over you. And that is not dramatic to say. That is very, very real. I've worked with many people and I've had many friends who are deep in the throes of that. And it is very hard to see when you're in it, because when we're dealing with things on a personal level, it's really hard to detach. But when you do detach at some point, or you are the detached person, whether it's me as the coach or me as a friend watching this, it's like, oh my goodness, it is so obvious that this has become a really big problem. And there's a lot of reasons why people might be clinging super tightly to tracking. And I'm not saying that people should be faulted for this, but we should work through this. And this is certainly a time where it's like, all right, maybe we need to back off of tracking a little bit and start to work on your mindset and your relationship with food. And the second time that you might want to step away from tracking macros is when it no longer serves your goals and you don't necessarily need it. So like we've talked about, tracking macros is great for specific goals, building muscle, performance, losing fat, changing your health, all these different things. But at some point when you're like, all right, I'm really happy with where I'm at, I'm maintaining where I'm at, do I really need to do this? Or is this creating more negatives than it is creating positives for me? These are all questions that are very, very individualized. And this is when maybe we don't necessarily stop tracking completely, right? Maybe it's like, all right, we're going to, because there is something that I would call tracking fatigue, right? So people have these specific goals, right? Hey coach, I want to get into a fat loss phase again. I've had some issues with tracking off and on before, but I think I want to do it again. I'm ready to dial back in. Okay. We do it for a few weeks. And then it's like, I'm really happy with everything and I'm not even really food focused anymore, but I'm just kind of fatigued from tracking macros. Well, are you trying to change things too frequently? Are you trying to track perfectly every single day in this app and adjust things? Instead, why don't we say, okay, these are my targets, right? Like those hypothetical targets that I just said, 200 carbs, 150 protein, 155 fat. Okay, what does that look like over 4 meals? Can I eat the same meals for 3 to 4 days? I prep them once, I measure it out, I'm good to go. I don't need to track now every single day. If you're preparing for a physique competition, you're making weight for a big tournament. Okay, hey, we got to really be dialed in very, very precisely every day. Anything outside of that, you're going to be able to do those things. And that's actually what I rely on as a habit now. I don't necessarily track macros, but that's what I do. I'm trying to aim to hit a certain amount of protein servings. I meal prep and I portion things out. Like I'm doing all of those same things because that's what keeps me on track. And that allows me to stay sane and not have any of this fatigue around food and around, oh my gosh, what am I going to have? People are always trying to like make all this crazy stuff or be, add different foods in and different meals and different recipes. And if you want to do that, that's amazing. But if you don't have the time for that, and that is creating some of this tracking fatigue, okay, well, maybe we don't need to stop tracking. Maybe we need to adjust the methods. But also maybe tracking is now creating more of a food focus for you. Maybe now tracking is creating more issues and causing more harm than it is good. So do we dial back the number of days that we're tracking? Maybe, hey, we were tracking 5 days a week or 7 days a week. Why don't we bring it down to 3 or 4 days of tracking? And then the other days can be tracking habits, right? Or maybe we just have to go through a few weeks of just tracking habits. Or maybe we just transition to that fully. So there's never a black and white answer with these types of things, especially when we're talking about food. And every client is going to be so different. And that's why when you work with somebody individually, you're able to tailor these things to them because it's dependent on their goals and what they're going through at that exact period of time and their personality and their history and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And being able to go in and out of different types of modalities with food, whether it's tracking macros or meal prepping or creating a meal plan or following portions or hitting these habit targets or whatever it is, whatever that is, being able to like ebb and flow through them is really the ultimate goal. And that is something that definitely takes a little bit more experience, right? When somebody's first starting, I'm not going to expect them to be able to seamlessly move through habits and tracking and then meal prepping and all these things. No, that's going to be a lot harder. But when somebody's on the other side of that, and that's what we're talking about here, when is a good time to stop tracking macros? It's usually for the client who has been doing this for a long period of time, who now has all of the requisite skills. They just need the confidence that they can do this on their own and use a different method. And it doesn't mean that we're taking tracking macros away either forever or entirely, but maybe we're adjusting how and when we do this. And that is going to be based on the individual, their goals, their personality, their current life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you enjoyed the show, please share it. That is the best way that you can support us. For information on coaching, you can visit teamlocofit.com, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter, which will be the first group of people to hear about our new app that is dropping in a few months. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.